Hi, welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to show you a jacket that I made using recycled leather from a couch that my neighbor threw out. Here is the exchange that we had via a text, and that's her couch right there. And she said, I told her you should have sold it. She said it's too old, and the bottom has started to sink in. I was like, okay, I'm kind of tempted to go and take the leather from the couches. It's reusable. So I did. And so here's a pile of the cutout leather from the couch. And this is the pattern that I'm using. It's Vogue 1714, which I purchased a couple of years ago. And it's still available the last time I checked. So here I start examining the leather. I had already decided that I was going to use a China marker to trace out the pattern. And so I used a red China marker and I started to cut it out like that. Now I found that the China marker worked beautifully, but I later switched to a white China marker because silly me, I only had a million white China markers and they worked a lot better. It was a lot easier to see. It's not like the color is going to bleed on the other side. So here's a sleeve that I cut out, the undersleeve, and the sleeve is in two pieces. Now this pattern was very simple in terms of Vogue patterns, because if you're familiar with Vogue patterns can be quite convoluted, and usually for the more experienced sewist, and I am that, but I'm very surprised at how simple this pattern was. So there's the collar, the under collar of the jacket, and I know that's an odd shape, but that is the under collar. So that was the white China marker on there. So here's the jacket all cut out. I have it all cut out and I'm ready to start sewing here. And I didn't condition the leather. I didn't wash it. I didn't do anything to it. The only thing that it smelled like was leather. That was it. Didn't have any funky smells. It was, I thought, a good thickness for a jacket. And so here I am removing the fill that's stuck to this side of the suede from the couch, just using a regular razor blade. And then while I was sewing, I realized that I needed to make these knots, because what happens is with leather, you, instead of back stitching, you make knots. And speaking of knots, my bobbin got all messed up, so I had to adjust the tension in my bobbin casing. There it is. All right. So here I am, I'm ironing on the interfacing, because even though it's leather, it's stiff, it's sturdy, you still need to give it some body. Now what I do is I use the iron-on knit interfacing. I use that for 95% of my projects. The only time that I'll use any other interfacing is if it absolutely needs a stiffer interfacing, or if that's all I have. But in this case, if all I had was the stiff interfacing iron-on, I wouldn't have used it. I would have just waited and then go ahead and bought it. So here I am making another knot. It's every time you make a row of stitching, you have to knot the beginning and the end of the stitch. So when you start stitching, make sure to leave those long threads. And when you finish stitching, leave some more long threads, because you're going to need to knot them rather than back stitch. So I'm sewing the sleeve front and back together. It's already sewn here, and I'm doing some top stitching. The thread that I'm using is a polyester thread for upholstery type sewing, because you need a heavy duty thread and the regular cotton just won't cut it. Now I'm wrangling here a little bit with the top and the bottom, because I want to make sure that my seams are kept apart and that my stitching is even. So you have to just go slowly and watch your stitches. Now when you sew this, you want to look at the edge on the right side of your foot rather than the needle, because you want to make sure that that edge matches up with the inner seam. Again, I'm leaving a long thread, cutting it, and then I'm going to tie those knots together even though I'm top stitching. Okay, so there it is. And there's going to be a little curve in there, so that's expected. That's the way the sleeve is. It's on a human form, so our bodies aren't just straight lines. Alright, so there it is. And I'm tying another knot there. And I'm also going to start working on the next sleeve. So that is coming up. Finish that. So this next sleeve, I am showing you how I am pounding the leather seam with a rubber mallet. And the reason you do that is because you're not going to iron the seams open on leather. So this is the equivalent of ironing the seams open, or in this case to one side, because I'm going to be top stitching. So when you're top stitching, you want both sides to be over. You want to move your seams over to one side, and you're going to catch both of the seams on the inside by top stitching. So here I'm doing the other sleeve, and I'm doing the opposite, as you can see. So my stitching line is to the right, whereas on the other sleeve the stitching was to the left. I forgot to turn off the light on my sewing machine, so it is a little glaring. I understand that, but just trying to get used to making these videos. So I'm just going really slowly because I want to make sure that my stitching is straight and that I'm not catching one side of the seam. I'm catching both seams. So I'm checking it throughout, and I'm separating both the left and the right so that when I stitch down the center, I have a smooth seam. Again, checking it. And that light is rather glaring, isn't it? Okay, so here I've gotten to the end of it. I'm not back stitching. I'm just going straight, and I'm going to go ahead and tie those knots again, leaving a long thread. Make sure to always use your snips at the sewing machine, and never use pinking shears, straight shears, paper shears. Make sure that you always use your snips, thread snips, for cutting at the sewing machine, because you can have some disastrous results. Alright, so here I am finishing up the seam by making a knot of the long threads that are left over. There it is. I'm not worried about like the length of like the left and the right, because that's gonna, I made these sleeves. I always make sure that my sleeves are too long, because you can always cut them shorter. It's gonna look funny to make longer. So my sleeves were too long in this jacket anyway. So here I am going ahead and knotting the top of the top stitching that I started, or rather that I completed on this sleeve. So now both sleeves are done. And there's the knot. That's what it looks like. Alright, so I'm just going to check out the sleeve, and then I've gone ahead and marked the zipper placement on this sleeve, and I'll show you how I marked it using masking tape. You have to find different ways to mark your leather, because you wouldn't mark it as you would on fabric. So there it was. Now I'm installing the zipper on the main body of the jacket. And I'm using a Teflon foot here. I didn't change the foot. It still works on the top regular fabric. So I'm making sure to keep my zipper straight, and I'm sewing slowly, little by little. As you see, I have a clip there to guide me, and since I can't see the underside. And then you just remove the clips as you go along. It's important to go slowly when you're installing a zipper, especially on a leather, because when you sew leather, once you make a hole, that is it. That hole is there, and there's no removing it. It's not like fabric. That fabric self-heals, for the lack of a better term, self-heals, but and you can't see when you remove a stitch for the most part on most fabrics, right? But on leather you can definitely see it. Now, surprisingly, I didn't have to sew the zipper more than once. I got it right the first time, so that was fortunate. Because then you have to make sure that if you sew it twice, that you sew it further in, or rather out, so that you can hide the first set of stitches. Alright, and there it is. There's my other side, and again I'm leaving the long threads, making sure that I can knot them later. Alright, so the next thing I need to do is I need to remove some teeth. The zipper that I purchased was a 36-inch zipper, and clearly I didn't need 36-inch zipper. I didn't need a 36-inch zipper. So what I had to do was I had to remove a couple of teeth, about 8 or 9. And here I'm doing just that. I'm using some wire cutters. And then I've also purchased some zipper stops, which go at the top to prevent the zipper from falling off, or rather the zipper slide. So there's on the left I've removed the zipper teeth, and on the right with my seam ripper I'm showing you how many, about 8 or 9 teeth that I need to remove still. So there they are. I've put the zipper stops on, I've removed the teeth, and I'm all set there. Now amazingly, this whole zipper installation went really smooth, and there it is. They're even. You got to make sure that they're even on the left and the right. So to do that, I put a little yellow marking using wax, and it worked out great. So now, is this the sleeve head? Let's see. Yeah, this is a sleeve head, and what I'm doing is I'm sewing, just straight stitching over that to make sure that I can use that stitching to pull and gather, because what you need to do is you need to have a rounded sleeve head that goes fitted into the body of the jacket. So I'm making 2 rows. Now I've never sewn with leather before. I've never made a leather garment, so I'm just assuming that this is how it's done. I can't imagine any other way. So I'm making the 2 rows as in a regular sleeve head, and then what I'll do is when I take it off the sewing machine, there I will pull the bobbin thread, and that will keep me from the threads falling off as I pull them. Now it's kind of a struggle to do this on leather, because you need to loosen up the bobbin thread when you do this on a regular fabric. And when you're doing it in leather, I didn't want to adjust my sewing machine bobbin, but I was able to get this rounded sleeve head like this by just pulling to one side. And fortunately, between doing that and using the rubber mallet to soften up the creases in the gathers, I was able to get it done. So there it is, rounded sleeve head. And I still, even though I rounded it this much, I still go back and need to round it off a little bit more because I needed to get more of that into the sleeve head so that it will fit into the sleeve properly. And here I've used clips. Again, you can't put straight pins inside, or rather attach it to leather, because it's going to make the holes pinholes. So I'm using the clips. These are a little bit stronger, these clips, than the little plastic ones. And I'm using these because I don't want the pieces to separate while I'm stitching. So here I am, and I'm wrangling it in a little bit because since the leather is thick and stiff, it's a little harder to work with than regular fabric. Now when you're stitching a sleeve into a body of a jacket or a top, you don't want to back stitch. You want to just keep sewing. Even though I'm using leather, I don't back stitch anyway, but don't back stitch when you're installing a sleeve. You just keep going and you stitch over what you start at the point where you started at. So let's say you're approaching the end of your stitching, then you stitch over 3 or 4 stitches, maybe 5, and you don't back stitch because you don't want to create any more thickness than you have to. It's a little bit of a struggle here because of all the thicknesses. I want to make sure that my seams are flat, because if they're not flat, it's going to look, especially after some time, it will appear on the right side of the jacket. You don't want that. You can see my long threads that I've left, that I've tied together. Okay, and that's it. Oh, and there goes that bright light. So here it is. I've got the front and the back. And then I'm working on the shoulder pads. The shoulder pads I ordered were 1/2-inch men's shoulder pads. They distinguish between men's and women's shoulder pads, so I'm assuming that the men's are thicker and heavier and longer. So I measured it just to be sure because it didn't seem like a 1/2-inch, but it's kind of a lofty 1/2-inch, and that's why it didn't seem like it. But yes, they were 1/2-inch. And so what I wanted was a little bit more thickness. So what I used was, I had a felt that I had used in some bags that I made, and I took the bags apart about a year later. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to build up that shoulder pad a little bit. So I figured if the white felt was about 1/16 of an inch in thickness, I could add another 1/8 of an inch to my shoulder pad. So here I am cutting out the additional padding for the shoulder pad, and I made 2 for each shoulder pad, and then I sandwiched the shoulder pad inside of these 2 pieces of felt. This felt is not wool. It is made from recycled bottles. So I felt like it was a win-win because I'm using recycled fabric that I recycled from a bag that I made, and the leather that I got was from a couch that my neighbor threw out. So win-win all the way around. So here I am, just sandwiching it together. And then to keep it together, the sandwich, what I did was I used a pad stitch. And the pad stitch is usually reserved for things like tailored coats or tailored jackets, but there's other uses for it. So I tacked it together using a pad stitch loosely, and I didn't line the actual shoulder pad. You don't need to line shoulder pads that are between a lining and a main body. And speaking of linings, here's the lining for my jacket. So I use this thrifted lipstick lining that I purchased. I think I got like somewhere between 3 and 4 yards for like something ridiculous like $4. I mean, it was super, super cheap. And I couldn't believe I got that deal. So yeah, installing this lining was really smooth. It went really fast. And it worked out really well. So that was very surprising for me. Because when you're fitting leather onto especially this fabric that was especially soft, you might get mixed results, right? Because you're combining two fabrics together. But it worked out, and I can't complain at all. And so I left the Teflon foot. I normally I would take off the Teflon foot to sew the fabric onto the leather, because the Teflon foot is for the leather, and clearly here I'm not sewing leather with the Teflon foot, I'm sewing the actual fabric. But like I said, it worked out really well, so I didn't change anything. And it went really smoothly. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't pin, or rather I didn't clip the two fabrics together, I did clip them together, but I kept hitting. So when I was sewing, it kept getting stuck between the sewing machine, or it just kept holding me back. So I just took the clips off, and I figured I would just, I saw that using the clips, it did fit well into the lining, fit well into the leather. So I didn't feel that I needed the clips anymore. I just sewed it on, and yeah, it worked. It was actually such the joy to sew this jacket. I really had a great time. There was a little bit of frustration with the sleeves, because I did remove the sleeves a couple of times, but yeah. So this is the part that I'm showing you right now is the front and the front side. So like where the princess seam would be. Here I'm going to go ahead and finish off the jacket using a label that I made with gold leafing tape that I've had forever. And actually I've never really used it in anything, so I'm about to use it now. And one thing I don't recommend, underneath the leather where I'm stamping it, is what I'm using is the clapper. And the clapper, I didn't realize how soft the wood actually is. So when I use the dies on here, you can actually see the imprint of my name under there. And it's not too deep, so I think with time it'll just wear off. But it was kind of late at night when I was doing this, and I didn't want to make a whole lot of noise. So I dampened the noise with the fabric, the Christmas fabric that you see underneath there. And I should have actually used a different piece of wood, but I didn't think it was going to imprint on there, and it did. So yeah, not too bad though, nothing crazy. I'll just go ahead and it'll come off, I'm sure, with time. So basically, alright, well, thank you so much for watching the video. If you like this video, thumbs up, share, subscribe. And here's the front of the jacket finished, and then we have the back completed, as well as the label with the lining peeping through. I hope this video wasn't too long, and if you do like it, don't forget, hit the notification button, like, subscribe, and share. Thanks so much for watching.